Welcome to That Worldview and another episode of Walking with God. As many of you know, I'm in Houston, Texas now, and I'm setting up a podcast for I.M.S.I and getting to know their team better. And while I'm here, I want you guys to get to know them as well. So I'll be interviewing several of them as the weeks go on. My special guest today is Josh Selvidge, 33 years old, from Houston, Texas, spent 4 years in the Army as an infantryman and paratrooper, graduated law school from the University of Houston, been an attorney for 3.5 years, husband and father of 4 children, ages 8 months to 8 years old, and attends Shady Acres Baptist Church. So Josh, it's good to have you on the podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Dave.
No problem. So I'd like to kind of dig into your testimony a bit and just how did you get saved? How did God lead you to where you are now?
Sure. When I was, really, this goes back to when my mom and my parents, I was born in 1991, and just before I was born, my sister, she was about 1 year old at the time, but just before I was born, my mom had actually got invited to church, my mom and dad, by a man that was going to Shady Acres Baptist Church. And they had no church background. My mom grew up Catholic. My dad didn't grow up with any kind of church background at all. And their lives were a mess, with just everything you can imagine. And so they came to church, took a few months. My mom got saved in a church service at Shady Acres. My dad, he got saved a few years later, and but just never really got established in church. So then I come along in 1991, about a year or so after my mom gets saved, and just she was faithful bringing me to church. She was in church. My dad wasn't in church, so we were kind of in a split Christian home. And we were in church every time the doors were open because her life had changed so dramatically, and she just wanted to be in church, me and my sister and my 2 older brothers. And fast forward to 2002, I was 10 years old at the time. And I had been, growing up in church as a church kid, I heard every sermon you can imagine on the Lord coming back. And back then it was like every single service was preached on the second coming. And my mom watched these really scary movies from the 70s on, it was before Left Behind, but it was about the rapture and like people getting beheaded. And I was just like, as a kid, I was so afraid that the Lord was going to come back and I was going to be left behind. My mom would be taken and I'd be left here with my dad and my brothers, And so that was just starting at about 8 years old. I really struggled with that and, asked the Lord to save me. Every night I would go downstairs and talk to my mom and tell her that I was afraid to go to sleep because I was afraid I was going to wake up and she wouldn't be there. And she would never tell me that I got saved or anything, but she would just say, she would allow me to pray and she'd say, Josh, the Lord is not going to come back if he knows somebody's looking for him, if he knows. And that would comfort me a little bit. And so it went on a couple of years like that from about 8 to 10. When I was 10 years old, our church has had 2 camp meetings every year since forever, a January camp meeting and an August camp meeting. Well, in our January camp meeting, which is like services morning and night for a week, and this preacher got up on a Tuesday night. His name was Brother Jack Parchman. And, I'm a 10-year-old kid sitting on the front row, not really paying attention. And he got up and he preached in the middle of this camp meeting on hell. And I'm telling you, it was, for the first time, it was the most real I've ever heard hell preached on in my life. And for the first time in my life, the Lord opened my eyes that I didn't need to worry about him coming back. I needed to worry about dying and going to hell. And I honestly thought, there was so much conviction on me at that point that I honestly thought if I left that service that I was going to die and go to hell if I didn't get saved. And so finally, the service went on for 3 hours, just one of these crazy long, or maybe even 4 hours. It was crazy long.
He got done preaching. Dying.
and people are getting saved left and right. I'm talking about over a dozen people got saved that night. Adults, children. Our guy he was in the tape room in the back of the church in the East Foyer, and he came out of there and he got saved. And, I'm sitting on the front row and I'm struggling with that same old thing that every Christian kid does. What's everyone going to think if they know that I'm not saved? Like anybody's carrying what this 10-year-old kid is, if he goes over and gets saved.
Right, yeah.
And so, anyways, finally I broke and I said, Lord, I don't want to go to hell for anybody. And the Lord was just drawing me, like the Spirit of God was just drawing me to come. So at that point, once I finally decided I'm not going to hell for anybody, I realized that I didn't know what to do. Like I had made it past that point of, through the pride part of it and humbled myself, but I didn't know what to do at that point. But I thought in my mind, you know what? Every time somebody gets saved, there's always this man, several different men, but there's an altar worker. Somebody goes pray with them. So I see Brother Tim Hederman, a man in our church, sitting over there where he always sits even to this day. And I saw him and I said, I'm going to go ask him. So I got up, I was on the front row, I walked over to him, and I just remember he looked at me. Funny, I stood there and I said, Brother Tim, I need to get saved. And he grabbed his Bible and stood up and he took me down to the altar. And, it was funny because he started showing me all this stuff through the Bible, but he didn't have to show me a single verse. Like I was ready. I was
Let me pray already.
Like I was broke. I was crying, and I was under so much conviction. I knew I was lost. That was the biggest thing. Was before I had always wondered, am I saved? Am I not saved? Am I saved? But at that point, the Lord showed me you're lost, and I knew it. So that's like that. Anyone who's been through that knows that it's unbelievably heavy.
Yeah, it is.
And so anyways, he told me to pray, and I prayed, and he said, Josh, did you get saved? And I said, I don't know, like nothing, And he
I don't feel different.
So he goes, pray again. So I'm like, I'm going to give it another shot.
Yeah.
But I prayed, and he asked me, Josh, did you get saved? And I just nodded my head, but really I didn't know. Nothing changed, and I stood up, and we stood up, and he called the pastor over, Brother Danny Farley. And Brother Danny walked over, and I walked up on this platform, and he said, Josh, did you get saved? And I said, yes. And when I said yes that time, that was just the littlest seed of faith, And at that point, I believe, like I'd already repented, I'd already confessed, but that was the point where I believed. And I didn't even know I had a burden on me, but man, the burden lifted. For the first time in my heart, like I knew on the inside that I was, the Bible talks about being passed from death to life. And I knew I had life on the inside, and there was joy, and I couldn't even explain it. And now it was just, I was crying tears of joy. And anyway, so I went down, gave my mom a hug, and people are still getting saved left and right. And it was just, not everybody has an experience like that, but I think as a church kid, I needed that experience because it helped me a lot later on in life with assurance of my salvation. Because I know it's not just an experience, it's faith, but man, it was an experience in my life. So that's how I got saved.
That's awesome.
10 years old, yeah, in church.
So you get saved at 10. How was your, I guess, walk with God? Because I know a lot of Christian kids, like I was raised in a Christian family too. And like I made a profession of faith at, how old was I? 9, but it didn't mean anything for me. I didn't actually get saved and start walking with God till I was 20.
Yeah.
And so what happened after that? Did God really start moving with you, or is it kind of like felt more like a stalemate until later on in life? How did that go?
So no, for the first probably a year and a half, God really worked in my life. Like as a kid, I remember a few months later, I got assurance of my salvation because I immediately started doubting my salvation. I'm just a kid, and I went to another camp meeting a few months later in Missouri, and I was sitting on the front row. And these people got up and sang, the Dice family, and they were singing this song, I'm Just a Sinner Saved by Grace. And the Holy Ghost, the Spirit of God, nudged my heart. I had $1 in my wallet, and he said, go give them $1, like in the offering plate. And I'm thinking, what? And, I'm on the front row, and I'm sitting there, and finally, he nudged my heart so strong to do it that I got up, and I went and I just gave $1 in the offering plate, and I went and sat back down. And as they kept singing, I'm just a sinner saved by grace, I'm telling you, the Lord, the Spirit of God, filled my cup in my soul. And I just started bawling on the front row, and the whole place started giving these people an offering. And I was bawling, just because I knew, I was they're talking about me. I'm just a sinner saved by grace. And the Lord gave me that assurance. And afterwards, there was this old missionary who's a Jewish guy named David Solomon. Daniel Solomon or David Solomon? I haven't even seen him since then. And he called me over to him. It was after everybody had left the building, and people are just talking for the most part outside. And he called me over to him, and he said, did you start that offering? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, he just looked at me and said, that was the Lord. And that just, I remember that to this day. And it was when the Lord showed me. And it's one of those milestones in my life where I can always look back and, I can't lean on, you can't lean on the words of men necessarily. You can't lean on yourself. But if God ever does something for you, you can always, it's a sure foundation. You can always stand on that.
Yeah.
I can trust his word. So that was about like 6 months after I'd been saved, 5 or 6 months. And then, it was just a really sweet time for that first year and a half. And then after that was really where it felt like my Christian life just kind of became stale. And, yeah.
It was like the honeymoon phase is over.
The honeymoon phase was over. Because I had went from every single camp meeting I was in, crying my eyes out on the front row, to eventually not really feeling anything at all. And there was a big part of that was ever since I grew up in the shadow of 9/11, just like probably you did. And I was also 10 years old when 9/11 happened. And so, grew up in a very patriotic part of the country, patriotic church. Everybody preached about patriotism after that. And so me and all my friends were determined, we're going to, the war in Afghanistan had just started. Iraq was just starting up a couple of years later. And we were like, we're going to go fight. We're going to join the army and go fight, join the military. And so that was still a huge dream of mine. And yeah. And I don't think, that was the Lord's plan for my life, but that was my plan for my life. And that battle started probably when I was about 12 or 13 years old. And that's when my Christian life kind of went, just kind of went stale.
Yeah. So obviously you did join the military.
Yeah.
Lord was like, no. And you're like, let's go.
It was a struggle, man, for like, for all those years, the wars were raging in Iraq and Afghanistan. And as I started getting older, like guys that were like 2 or 3 years older than me were joining from our church. Like, for a church of 200 people, we had well over 12, 14, 15 young men, like all my age, go and fight in those wars. So, our church gave a lot, but it was, guys were going, and I wanted to be part of that so bad. And, my parents got divorced when I was 10 as well. So a lot happened when I was 10. And my parents got divorced, and my dad was never, he had a real bad drug problem, and my brothers were in and out of jail. My dad was, in and out of prison, and it was just like I needed leadership in my life, and I longed for it. I look back now and realize that I longed for leadership, camaraderie, for a brotherhood, men in my life, and I looked at, I thought the military would give me that subconsciously, I think. And so fast forward to I was 18 years old, graduated from high school, told my pastor, I grew up in church, so I knew that I needed to ask my pastor about it. So I asked Brother Danny, said, I want to join the military. I want to join the Army. He already knew that. And he said, Josh, will you wait 6 months? And I was like, are you serious? Like,
What
like,
for?
Yeah, I've been waiting since 9/11, since I was 10 years old. So I told him, but I knew if one thing I knew, I was like, you know what? And my best friend had recently just joined the Army like 6 months before that. And he was already, I think at the time he was in training for the Ranger Regiment. So he was going into special operations, and he was getting ready for his first deployment to Afghanistan. So, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to listen to my pastor. I respect him enough, and I know that that's the right thing to do, even if I'm not necessarily right. If my walk with God is pretty cold right now. Mm-hmm. So then I waited, and then 3 months into me waiting, he said, I was working in the sound booth upstairs at the time in the balcony, and he was on the platform, and he said he looked up there and he saw me, and he said the Lord just spoke to him and said, let him go. And then so he came to me after the service, and he said, I don't know, the Lord told me to let you go. And I went the next day and joined, and then 3 months later I was shipped out and started basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, and that started the next 4 years of my life.
Wow. So what was how long were you in total?
So technically, it was like 3 years, and it was from the day I joined. It was 4 years exactly. Um, so from the time I shipped out, it was like 3 years and 9 months or 10
Right.
months, something like that.
Yeah. And what did you, I guess, what are some of the things that keystones that God taught you? For an example, like in my life, before I actually started walking with God, there were things that God started working and dealing with me on, even though I wasn't walking with Him
Yeah,
really yet. And there is a big difference, obviously, between being saved and walking with God.
yeah, for sure.
And did God use the military to start pushing you in that direction? How did that go?
He did. When I got into basic training, see, my walk was cold, right, with the Lord. But at the time, I was still a church kid. Like grew
Right.
up, I knew what was right,
Yeah.
and so I went into basic training thinking I'm gonna do right. I would say I was determined, but I really wasn't very determined. But I went in there like I didn't. I remember there were some challenges. For the first time in my life, I'd really experienced some physical challenges. I was in the infantry. The Army separates their basic training, or at least they did. I don't know what they do now, but they separated their training between like what branch of the Army you're going in. So I was going into the infantry, pure combat, right, like a combat role.
Yeah.
So all the infantry went and trained at Fort Benning, Georgia. So the guys who were going into like do radios or medics or something they all went to a different place. So it was all infantry guys at Fort Benning. So it was a lot tougher of a basic training, if you will. And so there, I just experienced some really physical challenges. And I remember at times just praying and being like, man, Lord, I don't know if I can keep going physically here unless you help me. And there was times where he would be like, I remember one time we were marching and we had been marching for like 12 or 15 miles, which at the time that was the longest I'd ever marched with a pack on my back, and that was
Yeah.
like, that was
You're
like
like,
hell
I'm
on
dying.
earth to me. Yeah, I was like, what? I grew up in the city. We drive everywhere. Like I never walked in,
Yeah.
much anywhere. So we're marching with like 50 pounds on our back, weapons, and we'd marched like 6 miles the night before, and later on in my Army career, that would be like nothing. That'd be like
Nothing.
normal.
Yeah.
But at the time, and I remember it was like, man, Lord, I can't. My legs are about to give out. Like I can't keep going. And like right at that moment, I was like, you got to do something. And I'm talking about seconds later, you don't stop, but the drill sergeants up front, they just were like, stop, everybody stop. And so we all stopped, and they're like, get down on a knee. And everybody got down on a knee, and they were like, something's like, they're not ready for us up ahead. We're going to some ceremony up ahead, and they're like, they're not ready for us. So everybody just hang out for a moment. And that was like, I was like, holy smokes, like the Lord just answered my prayer like immediately. Like it was, so he was teaching me stuff like that I could still rely on him, even though I
Right.
was not, I was still determined. I was still cold towards him and really my heart wasn't where it should be.
It's funny. I got to tell the story because it's just hilarious.
Yeah.
But now I wasn't in the military or anything, but I went to school in Big Sandy, Texas, and it's like a military style.
Yeah, alert.
Yeah, alert. Yeah. And I think we were on our 12-hour hike. And I think that hike, I don't remember. I think it was on like 30 something miles for that hike.
Yeah, 12 hours. That's a
Yeah.
long time to.
It's a long time to
That's a
ruck.
long time to ruck.
And so I think we didn't have watches. We didn't have any time. So I think we were like toward the end of it. I think we were roughly 2 hours to the end. So I was wasted, chafing really bad.
Yeah.
And I remember I kind of had the exact same thing, but God did the opposite with me. I said, Lord, like, I can't do this much longer. Like, I'm done. And I remember after we were on kind of like a hilly terrain. And so at the crest of every little hill, I was looking for the buses because I knew if I saw the buses, we were done.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking for this bus and I started getting angry because I wasn't seeing the bus. I'm like, Lord, like I'm like getting angry at God now. And a buddy of mine ahead of me, he goes, we walk by faith, not by sight. And he just like yelled it really loud. And God was like, don't pick your head up the whole rest of the hike. Just keep it down. I know when you're done.
Yeah.
And so I finished the hike and I didn't stop. It was like, God was like, no, I know when you're done, not you.
Yeah. And that's
it's
great,
great,
dude, because
yeah.
it's like either way, it's like, God's listening. He
Yeah,
hears
exactly.
you,
Yeah.
like in those moments. And that was what I needed more than a break,
Right. Yeah.
like I probably didn't need a break. I would have kept going.
Exactly.
But what I needed to know was that God
Well, God
God
was
was
listening.
listening. He was there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was in the same place too. Like I was a Christian kid, but I wasn't walking with God. I was pretty cold. But it was like you said, it was those moments that kind of were like, okay, it kept your faith in knowing God was very real.
Yeah.
Is what it did.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you finished basic, right? You have any more?
No, I went to airborne school. I had to jump out of airplanes. That was a new experience. I'm afraid of heights. So I don't know why I volunteered to do that, but I thought, at the time I was like, it's 6 months away. I'll deal with it when I come to it, which has been a curse in my life for everything. And
I'm jealous of that though. Like I haven't jumped out of a plane yet, and it's on my bucket list.
yeah, but that went well. I did all 5 jumps, graduated, and from there went to, after that I was supposed to go to Ranger training, ended up not going to Ranger training, and then went on to a unit, my first unit, which was in, of all places, Fort Polk, Louisiana, 3 hours from home. I didn't want to go, I wanted to go somewhere exotic. What was even worse was I went to a unit that was not going to deploy. They were a unit that trained forces that we were what's called Op 4, the opposing force. So units that were going to Iraq and Afghanistan, there was 2 places in the country they'd go train, either Fort Irwin, California, or Fort Polk, Louisiana, and they would come for a month of pre-deployment training, and then they would do their training. Then, it would be a mock war scenario. They would come in, we would fight against them, and then they would, go head out straight to Iraq or Afghanistan from there. And I got assigned to an airborne unit that was the opposing force, and it was a non-deployable unit. So I was in the dumps. Like, this is horrible. Not only that, I got there, and all of my leadership, like all the guys who were right above me, they had all deployed. Like, they were coming there from units that they had deployed, and it was kind of like a break for them,
Right.
to like rest. They had multiple deployments. Everybody did, except for all the guys who were my rank, which was privates. And so we went there, and they just treated us like total trash.
Yeah.
Trash. Like, they wanted us to know we were trash. We had not deployed. We had never seen combat, and they wanted us to know that, and they let us know. And
they let us know.
yeah, we spent a lot of time just random stuff. They torture you, man. It's just, but I learned that's Army wide. Mm-hmm. It's just there. Since we're not getting ready to deploy, it was just they had a lot more time to do it, and like we had the door to our company area. They would sit there, and they said every time you go out that door, you got to do 5 pull-ups. 5 pull-ups is not a big deal.
Right.
They would sit there all day and throw trash out the door and tell us to go get it. And so it'd be 5 pull-ups going out to get it, 5 pull-ups come back in, and just all kinds of games like that, So it was really just a miserable. I was there for 1.5 years, and it was really miserable. But I got to do a lot of really cool stuff while I was there. I got to train because I was in the scout platoon, the reconnaissance platoon, which is kind of like the snipers of the. I volunteered to go to that platoon, but all the sniper trained guys and ranger trained guys are there. And so we got to do some training with Special Forces, MARSOC, some Tier 1 units that we got to go to schools with them because we were their training partners. They would treat us like we were, they're in Afghanistan and we're the Afghan commandos or partners that they're training. And so we got to that was awesome. Like that part of it is, it was really great, that part of it. But the rest of it was...
for the birds.
yeah, the rest of it was terrible.
Oh, that's great. So did you deploy?
Yeah, so 1.5 years into it, we had some guy, I heard a rumor coming through, they call it the PNN, which is, we're all privates, the private news network. So the privates,
I like that.
It's hilarious because it's 90% of what comes across there is the privates talking to each other is not true. So a rumor came through the companies that ACO, Alpha Company, I had a buddy over there that, hey, there's a unit that is deploying out of Fort Riley to Afghanistan, and they need guys, and here's how you do it. You go online to your Army account, and he told me this way to find how you can volunteer to go to this unit, and that a bunch of guys in Alpha Company had already done it. And so I went on there, and I did it, and I clicked it, and I was like, okay, whatever. Well, the next thing I know, like 3 days later, my company first sergeant, which is like, I'm private, just imagine like, Sergeant Major is the highest you can go enlisted wise.
Right.
He's one below that.
Okay.
So I never talked to him.
So he's a bigwig.
He's a bigwig.
Yeah.
He comes into our platoon area and he says, Selvidge, you have orders to Fort Riley. And he's not happy about it. And no one in there is happy about it, that I'm escaping, I'm free. Because typically you're at your duty station in the Army for 3 years. And I'm a year and 3 months into it, and I'm getting to get out.
That's brutal.
And
Yeah.
my squad leader, the team leaders, all the guys that had deployed right above me, they were all happy for me. They're like, dude, you're going to go and you're going to see combat. Wonderful. Good for you. That's what you joined the Army to do.
Right.
All the guys that were older than them, they didn't want to lose me because they thought I was a decent soldier. And, they didn't want to lose a good soldier. So, but it turned out it was true. So right after that, they did what's called, they fenced in the unit. So the Army, because so many guys were leaving our unit, anybody who didn't have orders, they shut that down. They didn't allow anybody else to leave our unit. But I had orders, and me and several other guys, and so we left. So I was just shy of 2 years in the Army. I went to Fort Riley, Kansas, and all the guys up there, all the privates up there were like, this place sucks. This place is terrible. And I'm like, dude, this place is heaven. Like, I just came from Louisiana. Like, this place is awesome. There's a college town on one side and another town, a typical Army town on the other side of Fort Riley. But Manhattan, Kansas State University is in the town. And so they just had a lot of stuff for young people to do. And yeah, I was there for about 7 or 8 months training with the unit. I went to Fort Irwin for my pre-deployment training and got to do go against the opposing force there. And then May of 2012, we shipped out to Afghanistan.
Nice. And how was all that? What did God teach you during that time?
Which part?
Getting shipped out overseas.
Okay, so let me back up. Like when I had, after basic training, after airborne school, after getting to my unit in Louisiana, like, dude, I totally backslid on God from there. At the time, part of it was because the guys, like in the unit, the older guys, they were forcing you to do things that were not right. Like, I mean, you had no choice. It's just like, they were like, no, you will drink this beer. Like, you will, or we'll put it down your throat.
Right.
Like that kind of thing.
You're joining the boys. You're going to do what the boys do.
You're going to be one of us, whether you like it or not. But at the time, I could have stood up and been like, no, I'm not doing that. But I was pretty cold towards the Lord, and it didn't take much for me to kind of slide off the deep end. And, that was my first experience in the world, if you will, right? And I just got deeper and deeper and deeper, and left there with those guys, went to Fort Riley, Kansas. Now I'm in a college town, like you can only imagine, got deeper and deeper and deeper in sin and partying. And one of the things the infantry prides itself on is partying hard, because we train hard, we know we're fighters, we're going to go fight. Like,
there's like a massive ego that comes with
there
all
is
that.
a massive ego that comes with being in the infantry, in the paratroopers, in the infantry, all that stuff. There is a massive ego. You think you're better than everybody else who's around you, and you're also what's that? Eat, drink, be merry, for tomorrow we die. That kind of mentality. And because at the time, Iraq and Afghanistan were both going hard, and guys were deploying with the way the Army did it was you deployed for 12 months, you came home for 12 months, then you deployed again for 12 months. And it was a pretty significant, Afghanistan was, you were probably, I think there was about 60,000 troops, and there was 100,000 troops in the country when I got there. But of those, probably about 50 or 60,000 were infantry, and you had like 40 guys dying every month, getting killed every month. So it was a little bit dicey, so there was that mentality that
the death toll was decent for what it normally was.
And I remember a moment where my sergeant major, before we deployed, he gathered us up. This was actually in my first unit when I was still in Fort Polk, but he knew a lot of us were leaving. And he gathered all our battalion up into a formation, about 400 guys. And he just said, and he'd already had several deployments to Iraq, from the invasion of it on. So he was a seasoned guy, and he just looked around, a bunch of young guys, his kids basically. And he just said, some of you are not going to come back. And it was a real heavy moment. And he just said, basically, that you need to accept that some of you are not going to come home. And there were guys in that formation that would not come home, a year later. So anyways, by the time I deployed to Afghanistan, all that to say that I was really, really backslid, really didn't want anything to do with the Lord at the time, didn't want anything to do with church, wanted to get as far away from it as I could. And God was still trying to get my attention through all that. And I knew he was, but I was trying to shut him out. And I was just ready to go to war and see what that was like. I was ready to do what I'd
Yeah.
always wanted to do, which was go fight for my country.
And that's, you definitely can't hold that against a soldier. Most of my teen years, I had my heart set on joining like the SEALs was what I wanted to
Yeah,
do back in the day. And my dad always told me, he says, he's like, as a Christian, he's like, you be the best Christian you can. And he knew I didn't have a walk with God. So he was terrified of me going in for the same reason,
yeah,
like you get that peer pressure, you just walk away from God. And my dad knew that would happen to me if I joined the military. And so but I really liked my dad's outlook on soldiering. He said, be a Christian. He's like, but whatever occupation you're into, especially when it comes to soldiering, he says, do your job and do it well.
yeah.
And that was like, anyway, I had a point to that, but I don't remember what it
You
was
know
now.
what's interesting is that when these all of our parents like I mean the church was so patriotic after 9/11, so was the whole country, right? And everybody's flying flags and we're all like everybody's for the invasion of Iraq, hindsight's 2020. Like everybody's
Yeah.
like I remember sitting in the church parking lot on a Wednesday night listening, and they had the radio turned up out in the parking lot. One of the guys said he's like 18 listening, and everybody's gathered around the parking lot and we're listening to George Bush give his speech on right now our forces are bombing Iraq and it's shock and awe, and like this is the area I'm growing up in, like this is crazy. And they preached patriotism and love of country. I can remember so many messages on that. But then fast forward like 8 or 9 years and they're all shocked, and everybody, when all of us are joining the military and they're all against it, but we're
Yeah.
like, you all put this into us. You all put it into us. Like we're patriots. So
Yeah.
that's just, it's an interesting how that kind of backfired on all those on all the older generation.
It's easy. I guess it's easy for parents to be patriotic when your kids are 10 years old.
Yes, exactly. And but anyway, so yeah, it's
Yeah. And man, I'm telling you what, I mean, hindsight on wars has been very eye opening for me as well,
yeah,
because I like studying wars.
yeah.
But anyway, let's move on. So you got out of the military, or I guess, did you have any things that God really taught you while you were deployed or whatnot?
I knew that I knew right away. I hadn't. There was an incident. I was probably only 2 weeks in the country where I almost got killed, and I knew that it was. And me and all the guys in the vehicle with me, a rocket had hit our vehicle, and that was my first taste of combat. Like I almost died the very first time, but I knew that God had protected me because people were praying. And in fact, I got home to our outpost. We lived on a little outpost, a combat outpost, and I got back to my. I don't remember if it was that night or the next day. I think it was that night. We had this like little building that had like 3 phones in it, and you could go in there. Everybody would go in there and like call their parents at times. You had to have a calling card. This is before we didn't have any cell phones over there or anything. So we went in there and I called my mom, and I was talking to her, and she said, "Josh, the weirdest thing happened to me last night. I woke up in the middle of the night and God told me to pray for you." And I said, "What time was it?" And she told me, and it corresponded to the moment where that was happening, where this rocket hit our vehicle. There was a firefight, and it showed. And I told her, "Mom, if you ever feel that, please pray." And I just was like, I knew in that moment that God had saved my life, that He could have killed me right then because I was backslid on Him. But even that was not enough to wake me up. And we were there for 9 months. At times it was probably 90% boredom, to be honest with you, but 10%, probably contact, a lot of missions, a lot of operations, a lot of, we're infantry, light infantry, so we did a lot, just walking in the district and patrolling and combat operations, playing cat and mouse with the enemy, backing up special operations units that were doing targeted raids in the area. So a lot of stuff like that. And man, it was long. Like 9 months over there felt like, I can only imagine what guys in prison feel like, who are facing 20 years. Like, it just felt so long. But it changed my outlook. What's interesting about war is that even if you're not in combat all the time, you're afraid when you first get there. For like the first month, you're afraid. But then the fear goes to like goes to some undisclosed location in the back of your mind, but it doesn't go away. You don't think it's there, but it's always like right there, like, and there's certain moments where it comes back, where it's intense and it comes back. In mine, I was always afraid of losing my legs to an IED. Like that was what was happening a lot in our area, where guys would lose their legs. They would step on an anti-personnel mine and blow their legs off. And so there's moments where that fear would come back so heavy, and then you'd get past that moment and it would go back.
It would just hum in the background.
But it would hum, and I realized at the end of 9 months, like at 8 months, I wish it could have had like a timeline of photos of all of us, because when we got there, like our uniforms were fresh, and we're replacing the unit that's there, and they looked rough. They've been there 12 months, and they just looked rough. And then at the end, I remember at the end of our 9 months, a unit was coming in, the 10th Mountain Division was coming in to replace us. And I just remember, like, I looked at us and our uniforms, like my boots had holes in them. The bill on my hat was broken. Like our uniforms were like totally socked full of sand. And these guys were just like fresh faced, like daisies, like, and they looked so, like you could tell, like, some of them were veterans, obviously, but a lot of them had never seen combat, and you could tell. And
their eyes were bright.
Yeah, their eyes were bright. And I remember I was having to give them a class on a machine gun system on a truck. They were getting there because we're trying to teach them, as we're leaving, we're going to give them some classes and teach them about the area. And like, I'm sitting there and I'm up on top of the truck teaching them, and there's an explosion, and I look up, I'm just like, I'm going to go on. Like right over here in this bazaar about 300, 400, 500 meters away, there's a huge firefight starts. But that happens every day between the Afghan army and the Taliban. Mm-hmm. And so I just go on, and they're all like, and I just keep going, and then they look at me, and they're like, and I look at them, they're like, what is that? And I said, they're just fighting over there. And you could see the rockets going back and forth. It's like, don't even worry about it. Like
we're good.
Yeah. It's going to stay over there. They're going to fight it out. Probably nobody's even going to get killed because none of them can aim. And
they're like stormtroopers.
Yeah, exactly. So it was just funny, to see. It was just, I realized that fear, like, it just exhausts your mind. By the end, I was exhausted. I think we all were exhausted. And it's just that fear that's constantly present.
Yeah. How would, so after, you did 2 deployments?
Just one. I did one 9-month deployment. I got back and I had like 6 months left in the Army, and then I was out. I got discharged.
And then you got out. And so when did God really get a hold of you?
So I got back in February of 2013, and if the partying, I was 21 years old now. So if the partying was somewhat a little bit low key before I left, because I was still underage, it went from
skyrocketed.
Yeah, it was exponential when we got back. Plus we were all like, man, we just got back from war. We're combat veterans. Like we all thought we were, hot stuff.
Hot stuff.
So we were, and we hadn't spent any money. Mm-hmm. So we all had about 20 grand in the bank and thought we were rich. And so we quickly partied our ways through that for about 4, 5, 6 months. And it was September of 2013. It was, I remember waking up on a Saturday after we had partied all night on a Friday, and it was a bad night, and I woke up, puke all over me. I couldn't remember what had happened. The last thing I remember was seeing my buddy's face, and he had a plate of shots, and that was the last thing I remember. And apparently it was just a long night. I don't want to get into the details.
Yeah.
But safe to say my buddies were mad at me too. I had punched one of them, and so I woke up and I was just like, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of it. Like, man, I need the Lord. I need church. I need something. But I knew enough to know that the only place I'm ever going to get help is at the church. And in the little town that we're in, there was only one movie theater, and there was a church right across from it. Then my mom had come up to visit me before we deployed, and she was like, let's go to church on Sunday. So we had went to the church that Sunday, and so I had been there one time, and I knew about it. And the next day, my buddies were all going out again the next night, and I was just like, I made some excuse on why I couldn't go out Saturday night, and Sunday morning, I went to church, and I went again Sunday night. And Sunday night, they announced that they were having their annual Labor Day revival, and it was Labor Day weekend. And I was like, oh, man, Lord, I really don't want to go on Labor Day. That's my day off, and this is like, I don't want to do it. The next day, I got to get up at 5 a.m, to go to work. Mm-hmm. But so all of that Monday, all Labor Day, like the devil fought me on it, and my flesh fought me on it because I didn't want to go. But I knew, I was like, no, like I'm trying to change my life. I'm trying to get some kind of help. So I decided I was going to go. And that night I went there and I sat, and the preacher, I don't know who he was, but he got up, this is in Kansas, and he preached on the Holy Ghost. And I'm telling you, like, the Lord spoke to me in the middle of that message and was like, it was the Holy Ghost. He said, the Holy Ghost said, you know why I can't use you? Because he was preaching on the Holy Ghost using you. That's what it was. And he came and he said, you know why I can't use you? And I was listening, just listening to that voice inside of me. And he pointed to, he could have pointed to like 100 different things, but he just said, it's all that music you listen to. And I was like, huh. And for the first time in probably 4 years, I went down at the invitation and I prayed and I just said, Lord, like if you want me to give up all this, the music I listen to, then I'll do it. I'll do anything to get help. And, I'm sorry for everything I've done, basically. And I went back to my room that night, and I had iTunes, on my computer, like, and all my music, like, I don't know, it was tons of music.
Like all these playlists, curated playlists.
All these accumulated playlists that we all listened to all the time. Like, that's how we kind of all bonded, was music. We'd sit around, listen to music, and I just deleted all of it. Like, every last song, everything was gone. And I just closed my computer and I went to sleep. And the next morning I woke up and I read my Bible, and I'm telling you, dude, the Lord was real. Like, I read my Bible and actually got something out of it. And I went to church again that night, and I had 2 months left in the Army. I was short time, and it was just me. Nobody else in my unit was a Christian, and God just flipped my life around like that, dude. Like, just like the Lord became real, so real to me in those months. And I quit partying, I quit drinking. My buddies didn't know what happened to me. I was inviting them to church. One of them told me, I never saw this coming from you. What a testimony, yeah, right?
What a testimony.
For a Christian. None of them knowing that, I was saved, and the Lord it was like getting saved. And I would drive around Post, the base. I'd be driving, and dude, I would listen to Selah, but it was like I remember How Deep the Father's Love for Us, mm-hmm. and there is a fountain. Yeah. And dude, I would cry. Like, I would cry in my truck because I was so thankful to be right with God. And I was also like, man, Lord, like, how merciful. You should have killed me. Like, even when you didn't kill me, I still came back here and turned my back on you, and I knew better. And it was a really, like, those 2 months of being alone with nobody else, no good, and I was in the church, but no Christian friends around me. It was just really sweet because I only, like Paul said, the Lord stood with me. At first, no man stood with me, but the Lord stood with me.
I think that's probably one of the sweetest places to be, because I think for me growing up in church too, the idea was to get closer to God, you just have to do more.
Yes.
And then when you do, the relationship becomes intimate, you know. And I struggled with that all my teen years. But, your story, the great part I think about your story too is you literally went from being like totally messed up and your buddies hating you because you got into some random fight and, whatever, to you started listening to the voice of God, and it was like 2 nights and you were right with God again.
Yeah.
It didn't take this 5 years of serving God to be like, have that peace, like that.
Yeah.
God didn't withhold his peace because you'd been a rebellious child for
Yeah.
years. His peace came when the obedience came.
It was that moment when like that prodigal son, literally, when I just said, what am I doing? I'll arise and go to my father. And I was still a mess. I still had a lot of baggage to deal with.
For sure,
And I
yeah.
still this is what I tell young kids nowadays. Like, I still deal with baggage from that. Certain things in my life, that sin that took root in my life, and that, man, the Lord it's taken 10 years to root it out.
Yeah.
But but you're right, the Lord didn't. There's so many things that, like, the Lord's not concerned with all that. Like, there's that verse in the Bible where he says, rend your hearts and not your garments. He's worried about the heart, and my heart was for him. You know, I had a little bitty Bible my mom gave me, and I would always bring it to church, this little bitty military Bible. I mean, I'm telling you, I was saved. Like, I grew up in church. You would have never thought, because I was like a baby Christian, was basically what I was looked like to other people.
Yeah.
Little bitty Bible, like prison Bible. like,
And like, is this your first time in church?
No church clothes, like
Yeah.
none, you know? So like, I even wore my uniform the next night after I got right, because I didn't have anything that was like decent to wear really to church. And anyway, so I just remember writing in there, that song, I have decided to follow Jesus. And I wrote, no turning back. And I was still a mess and still am a mess, but that has encouraged me over the years. Like, no turning back. Like, I haven't decided to follow me, although I have at times.
Yeah.
I haven't decided to follow,
yeah.
whatever, careers and self-interest, although I have at times. But, man, no turning back. Like,
Yeah, I love how real it is, because I resonate. It's funny, our lives kind of growing up were so different in some senses.
Yeah.
But it's amazing when you tell the lessons that you learned. I can flash back and I learned the exact same lessons at different points.
Yeah.
Just in totally different ways.
Yeah.
And it's really I was actually talking, so crazy story. It's really crazy how this works, but a buddy of mine, he lives in California, but I grew up with him in California, and he comes from a really rough background. Like, he was doing drugs at 9th grade and like giving them out and, selling stuff and all this. And, but his dad brought him to church faithfully. And then, there came a point where my dad God put it on his heart to send this buddy of mine who had a rough background with me to Alert. And so my dad paid his way to go, which was like thousands of dollars.
Wow.
And so he went with us, and that was like 8 years ago or something like that, 9 years ago. We went to Alert, and, after he got out, after we both finished our school and got out, honestly, he just dove right back into the world hardcore,
Yeah.
and I didn't see him for years. And like 2 months ago, I was back in my old hometown, and I saw him in church. I thought he was still out in the world. I was going to go try to find him, is what I was planning on doing that Sunday afternoon. But I turn around and he's standing there in church, and he just called me right before you showed up here. And it's been so warming to my heart, because my thought was, I'm going to have to, like, hopefully try to pull him out of a mess. And quite frankly, he's actually been an encouragement to me. Like, he just got done running 7 miles, got out of jiu-jitsu, and I'm like, bro, like, you're convicting me, man. And he's like, what did you learn in the Bible today? And he's asking me these questions, and I'm like, oh man, like, it's been so heartwarming to see that intense fervor, there. And it's been convicting to me, And God, one thing God's shown me the last couple of days, just with thinking about him and stuff like that, was like I'm nothing. Like, who? Like, what? Like, who am I kidding?
Yeah.
Like, who am I kidding? And it's just been very helpful to just watch God just fundamentally move. And we didn't do anything. Like, I did nothing. God came in and just, the religious Christian side of us is like, oh, well, I have to do all this work to get here. Or if I'm going to help this person, I've got to, like, do all of these things, and then he'll get better, and it'll be because I did it. I was trying to go see if maybe he might have been hung out on drugs, if I can go find him. And then I just see him standing in church, and he's asking me what I'm reading in the Bible. Like, it's such a beautiful thing.
It is, man. And we underestimate how much God is after people, and how much, like, I know we know that he sent his son to die, but like, it says he's not willing that any should perish, So like the fact that he went to alert and then he dove back into the world didn't mean that God was done with him. Like God's God, and the Spirit of God could do whatever he wants to do, and he was he was after him, I'm sure, and you didn't even know about it. He was
No, I lost his number. I hadn't talked to him in 4 years.
Yeah. And so that's
God's good. So, man, we've been going for 50 minutes. That's pretty good. So I want to so how did you get involved? I kind of make it full circle to the I.M.S.I stuff, to some degree of how you got involved with them with your career.
Yeah. So I'm 33 now, and I got out of the Army, started working in construction, started going to school on the GI Bill, worked in construction for like 7 or 8 years, got married during that time, met my wife in church, and it's hilarious because I'd only been back in church for like a year when we met, and we got married like later that same year, so like 9 months later, and she tells me now, I never would have, she grew up in church. I never would have married you if I'd known you only been in church for a year. So, and I always tell her I put my best foot forward. I had to woo you. And
that's good.
So, anyways, I got married. I was going to school, and at that time, again, like my walk with the Lord, like I was in church, and I wasn't partying anymore or anything like that. But like my walk with God was the career was getting in the way. It was just self was getting in the way. And I was going to law school, and there is a season where you got to focus on your career a little bit because you got to, I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but I had to go to school.
Yeah, I had
to provide for my family.
Yep.
But at the same time, I started missing a lot, like every Wednesday, because during law school, I had classes on Wednesday night. I was going to school at night. And I started missing some Sunday mornings every now and then, some Sunday nights every now and then, because I was studying or taking a test. And that just was not good for me. And like I said, I still had baggage I was dealing with from the Army. And I remember that it went on like that until 2019. And it's funny, one of the guys who's with I.M.S.I, Chris, he was, at the time, he was on fire for the Lord, like just started going, just was on fire and was young guy, but in not doing everything the right way probably, but was on fire and was zealous. And I remember there had been several guys that had come through the church recently, like missionaries, where they had this fire and this fervor and this zeal. And I was like, Lord, I don't have that. Like, I want that. I know what it's like to have that, but I don't have it anymore. And so 2020, January of 2020, Chris got up and he preached in a camp meeting, which was like at Shady Acres. He's 20, 6 years old, 7 years old, something like that. And that was unreal, like unheard of.
Yeah.
And we always laugh because he had a lot of, hopefully if you ever do his podcast, ask him about that sermon because it's hilarious. He accidentally turned the lights out.
I'll write that down and I'll ask him.
It was a bunch of funny stuff that happened, right? And like a bunch of goofs but God used that in my life because I was like, man, if God can use that guy, like, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean like he's my contemporary, like he's the same age, he's a little bit younger than me. He's like, but God's using him. And if then I know the Lord can do something with me. So I was like, I'm going to become friends with Chris. So I start hanging out with Chris and I get in, I'm not missing any more church. I'm going to prayer meeting from here on out. Like every time the doors are open, I'm there because like being a lawyer is great, all that stuff, being a veteran, whatever. None of it amounts to a hill of beans if you're not walking with the Lord, if the Lord's not real to you. And it's all temporary in the end. So I start hanging out with these guys, Chris and Brian and Jack, and we start going to like some different meetings and just had a great time for like a year. Like we just hung out together and had a good time, and we're knuckleheads because we were like judgmental of everybody else who wasn't like one of us. Like, hey, we're on fire. Why are you on fire? Just total jerks. Spiritual
jerks.
But it was but it was a season in my life that I needed that, where I needed to like get in and be part in and get serious about the Lord. And during that time, the Lord was working on me about, man, this is like, I don't know, this is going to take like 10 minutes. Like, I hope if we have time.
No, go ahead. We have time.
So during that time, December of 2019, right before this happens, I'm on my iPhone, right, in the car, or my iPhone breaks. I'm like, I got to get another iPhone. So go get another iPhone. It breaks. Then I'm like, okay. So I go and get another iPhone. Thankfully, I didn't have to spend money. Like, they're under warranty. Go back and get another one. Well, my wife is like, we're putting on some music in the van or something, backing out. We've got a couple kids. And it's nighttime. It's dark in the van, and I have a cup of coffee in the cup holder. And she takes the iPhone, and she's going to put it back in the other cup holder, and she drops it in the cup of coffee and fries it. And so at this point, I'm like, Lord, you're trying to tell me something, aren't you?
I'm 3 phones in.
I'm 3 phones in like 2 weeks. And so I was like, Lord, you're trying to tell me something. And I started praying. And in January 2020, this preacher got up and preached on the purpose of the waste. And it was on when the woman broke her alabaster box, and the disciples said, what purpose is this waste?
Right.
And the Lord told me, I'm telling you, he told me, he said, Josh, I want you to give up your iPhone. I want you to give up your phone. And I was like, and I just started, like, I was going to get in church with these guys. Well, that was pretty hard struggle for me for like a year. Like, I always struggled with what people thought about me.
Yeah.
So I knew if I
got rid of my phone.
Got rid of my phone and went back to like a flip phone, like everybody's going to be like,
yeah.
What's wrong with you? Like, hey, dude, like, it is 2020,
Yeah.
And which is funny because only 10 years before, everybody had flip phones and it was cool. But I was like, you know what? So
pull out that little antenna.
I struggled with it for a year. And I'm telling you, like, every preacher that got up and preached, I felt like he preached straight to me on, submitting to the Lord, giving up something. And it took a full year. And Brother Cody Zorn came down. It was January camp meeting again. All these things have happened in January camp meeting. And Brother Cody Zorn preached on I surrender all. And he preached about how the guy who, when David had the ark and he left it, I think, was it Obed-Edom? He left it at his house.
Obed-Edom, yeah.
And that the ground, and David said, David would not, he wanted to give David this ground for the ark, and David said, no, I want to pay for it. And I may be getting the story a little bit wrong, but David said, I want to pay for it. I won't take it for free. And Obed-Edom gave up that ground. Well, that ground later became the site of the temple. And so it was like crazy, like this ground later became the site of the temple that he gave up, and he surrendered it. So I, in that moment, was like, Lord, okay, this is going to be crazy. Everybody's going to think I'm a fool, but I'm going to give up my phone. And I was like, I need a phone, so I'm going to go back to a flip phone. And I got a flip phone, gave up my iPhone, got a flip phone. And once again, dude, it was like a step in my life that the Lord, like, I grew a little, I grew, and I learned about submission to the Lord. And so I submitted, and the Lord started, and just right after that, I started teaching Sunday school, or right around that same time, I was asked to teach Sunday school in the church and got in on the regular Sunday school rotation. And actually had to go from reading my Bible to studying my Bible, which was a big difference. I didn't know.
There's a difference, yeah.
And I always thought I was studying by just reading, but no. So I was studying, and the Lord started working in my life like crazy. And right at the same time, I.M.S.I was getting started. So a year later, I.M.S.I was getting started that year. Ukraine, the war kicked off, and I was like, the Lord was doing so much work in my life. By that time, Brother Brad Whitbrock was here as the pastor. We were hanging out all the time. We wasn't the pastor yet, but we were hanging out all the time. We're learning a lot from him just about how this thing, and the Lord was teaching me at the same time, this thing is not, you don't work it up. Like, the Lord's got to work through you. And like, basically, like, we're nothing, like you just said. And so, anyways, I'm going around with my flip phone, just living life, and Ukraine kicks off, and Chris is involved with I.M.S.I because he happened to be at a meeting at a camp meeting or something where they talked about it and it got started. And Dylan, this other guy you haven't met yet, he's involved with I.M.S.I. He's going to Ukraine with Brad. Brad, all these guys are involved. And I'm like, hey, hello, I'm a combat veteran. Like, hello, over here, take me.
Yeah.
And nobody took me. Nobody asked me to be involved. Everybody was like not doing it around me. Like, they're talking about it openly, but they're like,
it was like it was happening, but you had no part of the conversation.
I had no part in it, and it felt really bad too, because it was like nobody was like, hey, Josh, come and be part of this. We want you to be part of it. Instead, it was just like, no, we got our team. You go ahead and sit out this one. And
you're like, what?
And that bothered me, dude, hardcore, because interesting enough, before the war started, Brad was talking about going to Ukraine, and I told him, I said, I want to go with you to Ukraine. And then he ended up taking somebody else. which Dylan's a great guy, right? Like really good, good friend of mine. And it took another year. It's funny, these things take like the Lord teaching you things takes a long time. It took another full year for the Lord. I was reading this book a year later, and it was really bothering me that, especially there was one night in church where they got up and they're like, we just want to thank Chris and Dylan and, naming the guys in I.M.S.I. And I'm like, and I'm part of their group that they hang out with, but I was not part of I.M.S.I. And and the other thing was I always had a heart for missions work, like big time. Like I wanted to be involved. And I was just like, man, this sucks. And I was reading this book called A Tale of Three Kings. A Tale of Two Kings? Tale of Three Kings?
Tale of Three Kings.
And there's a chapter in there where he talks about the motivation behind the power of God. Why do you want the power of God? And man, the Lord checked me so hard on that because he just like stopped me and made me look inside and said, why do you want to be part of I.M.S.I? And I realized that it was just me. I wanted in on the adventure. I wanted to be with the boys, I wanted to go.
Yeah.
But it had nothing to do with the Lord, really. I mean, my heart was for the Lord, but my motivation was not.
Your motivation wasn't quite right.
It wasn't quite right. So at the same time, Brother Brad preached a message on, and this was probably the most defining moment in my life outside of being saved. It was that night that they stood up and they recognized all those guys, and I was just like, Lord, this is like, I need to hear from you because I don't know why I'm being overlooked. I don't know why I'm not involved. I felt like the Lord didn't want to use me. Like I was not supposed to be part of any of this because, I'm a mess. Like I understand I'm a mess, and it's just never going to work out for me to be part of this kind of stuff. Like, but these guys are going to go on and do great things, and
You're going to be stuck holding the offering plate.
yeah, I'm gonna be here behind you guys, sending you monthly support, working,
Yeah.
I guess, doing things that seem meaningless, but anyway, so that night, Brother Brad preached. I was like, man, felt like I was in a dark spot.
Yeah.
And Brother Brad preached on Elisha was with those guys, and they had the axe, and one of the axe head fell in the water, and the axe came up and swam, and he said, anyways, Elisha told the guy, he said, reach out and take it. Reach out and take it. And basically that guy was never going to get that axe head back until he believed Elisha and reached out and took that axe back, that axe head. And so Brother Brad basically said, there comes a time in your life when God offers you his power, his anointing. And he said, you just got to believe him enough when he offers it to reach out and take it. And he looked out in the audience, and I'm feeling bad. And he goes, and he called my name. He said, Josh, he said, I'm telling you, there comes a time. And he said, there was a time in my life when, and he quotes the verse that affected him so much, which was Isaiah 60, verse 1, which is, arise, shine, for thy light has come. And he said, where God offered that to me. And he said, I just had to reach out by faith and take it. And he said, my preaching, my life has never been the same. And man, I knew that the Lord was talking to me right there through Brother Brad. I mean, literally talking to me. And I never do this really, man, before it comes back to what people think about you, but he's still preaching, and I stood up out of my pew where I always sit near the back with my family, and I walked down to the altar, and dude, I'm telling you, the Lord, the Spirit of God said, Josh, I want to use you if you just believe. And it was at that point that I realized, man, that this thing is not about works. It's not about what I can do for God, but it's about what God can do for me. And so at that point, I said, God, I don't know why you'd want to use me. I'm in a dark spot. I said, but I know this, that you do all things well, and I believe. I said, I believe you want to, and you will. And I let go of all the wanting and chasing I.M.S.I. and all that stuff and wanting it. And I just literally took my hands off my life and said, God, whichever way you want it to go, if it's sitting here, if it's going somewhere else, like, you do all things well. And it was really great because at that point I took my eyes off of what I thought was spirituality, missions work, stuff like that. And that verse says, turn us and we'll be turned. And he turned my eyes upon him. And man, dude, the Lord, I know we talked about, this may sound mystical, it's not, but the Lord I felt the Lord like pour in his Spirit and put his hand on me. And I was totally fine with it. And that didn't mean was perfect. Like I still mess up and blow it and do it, I'm still a mess.
Right, yeah.
But he taught me something so defining in that moment. And that was now, this April, that'll be 3 years ago. And it wasn't, after that, I stopped worrying about trying to be part of I.M.S.I. I started actually like praying for the guys that were going and like being like, man, Lord, I can be involved. I may not go, but I can be involved in praying for them. And the Lord just started teaching me and leading me in this thing of believing God. And in fact, Jesus said, and this is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. There's a few of them, but Jesus said, the disciples came up to him and they said, what can we do to work the great works of God? And he said, this is the work of God, that ye believe on him whom he has sent. That's it. Nothing else. He said, just believe on me. And that meant, for me, it meant taking my hands off my life and letting God lead and believing him and just going wherever he wanted me to go, doing whatever he wanted me to do. It sounds simple, but, and resting in him. And it doesn't always work out great, but
Yeah.
Fast forward a year and a half later, and I got heavily involved with I.M.S.I. Still am today. They asked me to be involved, and the Lord, that was all of the Lord too, and working with them and doing a lot of cool stuff now.
Yeah, something you said multiple times in the podcast, which I've really enjoyed, is you'll say God taught you this lessons, and then you'll say, but it's a struggle. Sometimes you have to, you kind of crash for a little bit, and God helps you through it all, and then you just keep going.
Yeah.
And they're like fundamental lessons. It's like you learn you learn it's like God teaches you a lesson fundamentally. It's like you get it, kind of like sitting in church and Brother Brad, saying something to you and you getting it finally, and so you get it in like a heart sense. And then from there, it's God building upon that foundation.
Yeah.
And even through the struggles and everything else, that foundation is still laid, and you're then building on that.
He works it into you, and you work it out,
Yeah. No, it's that. I think one of my favorite passages in Proverbs, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but the righteous man falleth down 7 times and gets back up again. Yeah. A righteous man isn't dictated by him not falling. He's dictated by getting up.
Yeah, Brother Brad says that, he says that I don't even know if you're just or righteous, because that's what that verse says. If you have never fallen, or if you don't believe you've ever fallen, everybody's fallen. But if you don't see that, and if you don't believe it, he said, I don't even think you're righteous or just, because that's the qualification.
Yeah,
it's that you fall 7 times.
Which 7 in the Bible, I believe, is the number of completion. So you have to be like, you really learn, So
and that's all right, man. And the Lord just take you step by step, and he's taking me step by step, and still teaches me stuff all the time. And I still get in spots where I'm like, it seems like a dark spot, and I'm like, man, what is going on here, Lord? And that's just the nature of it.
Yeah.
It's ups and downs, and
yeah,
but it's no turning back.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks so much for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
All the guys are coming in now. We're actually gonna have a meeting about the I.M.S.I. podcast. So thanks everybody for listening to the podcast. If you have any questions or different ideas for what you guys would like to hear, let me know. You guys have a good day, and we will catch you on the next episode.